Just one more rod.
Dude, we're gonna miss the... Hey, you're bringing all of that with us.
Yeah, we're nymphing, right?
Yes, we are.
And that's all you're bringing?
Yeah, you don't need all of that to go nymphing.
Well, what do you need?
Despite what you might see on social media or in fly fishing magazines, you do not need an entire fly shop's worth of gear to go out and be successful when you're fly fishing with nymphs. Shoot, you don't even need a specialized fly rod. The same fly rod you use for everything else will work just fine for nymphing. Today, I'm gonna lay out the 5 pieces of gear that you need to go out and catch fish on nymphs. And number 1 is the rod and reel combo. A 9-foot 5-weight rod is ideal for nymphing because it's got the backbone to throw some larger nymphs, some split shot, and even bobbers, but it's still soft enough to fish with your dry flies as well. That's why we recommend a 9-foot 5-weight rod, like our fancy dancy fly flinger, as the ideal rod for just about anyone. These 9-foot 5-weights are the jack of all trades in the fly rod world. They'll handle everything from small creeks and rivers all the way to lakes. You do not need a 10 or 11-foot 2-weight rod for nymphing. Now, you might see rods like that listed for sale as nymphing rods or Euro nymphing rods, but again, you don't need those. Euro nymphing is a catch-all term for a style of fly fishing that doesn't use strike indicators or traditional fly casting. It's very effective and a lot of folks really love it, but it's got a much steeper learning curve than the style of nymphing we're teaching. Now, those lighter weight rods do have an advantage because they're a bit more sensitive. A 3 or 4 weight is great because you'll feel the fish eating your flies a bit more than you will on a 5 weight. If you go with a heavier rod like a 6 or a 7 weight, you'll have an easier time casting bigger nymph rigs, but you lose a lot of sensitivity. That's why we recommend the 5 weight. It is the Goldilocks rod. As far as reels go, you just need any decent reel with 5-weight, weight-forward floating line on it. You might see some fly lines advertised as nymphing lines, but you don't need those. They're highly specialized and they're just not as versatile as your 5-weight, weight-forward floating line. Now, don't worry about remembering all this stuff or frantically writing notes down while class is in session. We have put all of this information and literally everything else you need to know about nymphing into our free pocket nymphing guide. Check that out in the video description. And number 2, you need leaders and tippet. First, let's talk about the leaders. Depending on what you're fishing, it's probably a good idea to have 3X, 4X, and 5X leaders on hand. The bigger the flies you're fishing, the thicker the leader you'll need to turn them over. For example, if you're fishing a really big Pat's rubber legs, a 3 or 4X leader is the way to go. If you're fishing smaller midge patterns, you might want to size down to 5X. A good rule of thumb is to take the size of your fly and divide that by 3. And if I'm in between sizes, I usually round down. You'll also find that the leaders come in different lengths. Because the goal with nymphing is to get your flies down where the fish are, I find it's best to use a standard 9-foot leader. But as you change flies throughout the day, you might find that your leader starts getting shorter and shorter, or you might get to a deep hole and want to get down even deeper than 9 feet. That's why you need some spools of 4X, 5X, and 6X tippet on hand. Unlike leaders that are tapered thick to thin, tippet is a single diameter. This is what you will use to extend the life of your leader or create different rigs, which we'll talk about in the next video in this series. Now, as if this all ain't confusing enough, when you're shopping for tippet, you're going to find that there are 2 different types. We've got nylon, which is probably the most commonly used, and then fluorocarbon. When it comes to nymphing, I prefer using fluorocarbon because it's more abrasion resistant, which is good since your rigs will be bumping against all sorts of rocks, logs, old cars, empty washing machines that are lining the bottom of the river. It's also denser and sinks a bit quicker, and it's more invisible in the water than nylon, so fish don't see it as easily. You can certainly use nylon for everything, and I use it for probably 70% of all the fishing that I do, but fluorocarbon does have some pretty distinct advantages. Moving on to number 3, you need hundreds upon thousands. Let's just make it an even billion flies. You don't need that many flies, but it's a good idea to have a nice collection of them. In the previous video in this series, we went over the 12 patterns that we will not leave home without. I'll throw a link to that video in the description. Number 4 is another must-have piece of gear, and that'd be your strike indicators. Now, some people get really upset if you call them bobbers because us fly anglers would never use bobbers. No, we're far too sophisticated for such tomfoolery. But it literally bobs in the water, so I'm gonna call it a bobber. There are tons of different kinds of bobbers out there, but they all serve the same purpose. They keep your nymphs suspended at a certain depth, and they tell you when a fish has eaten your fly. You can buy bobbers made from foam, cork, plastic, and then some kind of yarn or wool. Foam indicators come in a lot of sizes, from pinch-on indicators that don't even hold nymphs up, they just tell you when you've got a strike, to really big ones that can suspend a nymph the size of me. Foam floats high, it's easy to see, easy to cast, and usually these bobbers don't kink up your leader. The bobbers we use here at VFC are the Oros foam indicators, and they're great. They're super easy to take on and off your leader, they don't kink it up, they cast well, and they float forever. Plastic bobbers are tougher to cast in the wind and don't land on the water all that gently. They float forever though, and they will hold up an anchor, seriously. They're a good option, but they'll often kink up your leader when you attach them, and they can slide around a bit. Cork bobbers are easier to cast, they land softly, and they float pretty high. These aren't used as much as foam or plastic indicators, mostly because they aren't as durable. They're not as easy to adjust, and they're a bit harder to see. If you want the lightest indicator, yarn or wool is your best bet. You'd use these if you're fishing nymphs in low, clear water to spooky fish where a bobber splashing on the water might scare them. They're also great when fish are eating softly because they're more sensitive. In my experience though, they're a pain to keep floating and don't always stay in one spot on your leader. Whatever indicator style you go with, they do come in tons of sizes from small to extra large. If you're using bigger, heavier nymphs or even split shot, you'll need a bigger indicator to support all that weight. But with that bigger indicator, you are sacrificing sensitivity and stealthiness. That larger indicator landing on the water is going to make a bigger splash, which could spook the fish. You'll also be able to see more sensitive, less committed eats when you're using smaller bobbers. The majority of the time, my default is to use a medium-sized indicator, but I will go smaller if I'm fishing really tiny flies. Now the last piece of gear you need is something that your mom has an abundance of: weight. You've got to get your flies down to where the fish are, and that often means you're going to have to put on some extra weight. Now we've got two options to do that: split shot or putty. Split shot is made from either lead or tin. Since lead is banned for use in waterfowl hunting, and we know it's not all that great for the environment, some people opt to not use lead split shot at all. Lead is soft, it's heavy, and it's easy to add or remove from your rig, but it can deform and slide around on your leader. Tin split shot is much more eco-friendly, but it's a lot lighter than lead. You'll have to use more to achieve the same depth. Tin is a harder metal, so it's less likely to deform or slide around, but it's a lot harder to remove from your leader once added. If you want to steer clear of split shot altogether, there is another option: tungsten putty. The main appeal to putty is that you can add just a tiny bit or remove a tiny bit and even reuse it. It's infinitely adjustable, so you can really dial in how much you need for the perfect drift. It's made from tungsten, so it sinks quicker than lead or tin, and it's environmentally friendly. However, I've found that putty has a tough time staying on my leader. It's messy to handle, and it's just not as convenient to use as split shot. Now, as a disclaimer, I personally have not used putty very much. The couple of times I've done it, it has not been a great experience but I know anglers who use it and swear by it, so it's definitely worth checking out for yourself. And that's it. That's literally all the gear you need to go out and catch fish with nymphs. But there's just one big question. How do we rig all this up in a way that's actually going to put a fish in the net? Where does the indicator go? How much split shot should you use? Are there special knots for attaching nymphs together? We'll answer all those questions and cover everything to know about rigging up your nymphs in the next episode. Check it out right here.